It is Wednesday, January 29th. We're starting our work on the governor's proposed capital budget. We're starting off with dealing with historic preservation. And it's section 4 of the governor's budget. And Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you. So if you can introduce yourself for the record and give us your background on what's being requested for funding. Also, I know you also give us quite a bit of history too for back appropriations as well.
Great, thank you very much. I am Laura Trishman, the Vermont State Historic Preservation Officer. This is a position I've been appointed to for 12 years now, and it's been my great pleasure and sometimes frustration, being open and honest.
More often frustration.
Yeah, you do okay.
One of the things under our purview is the stewardship of the Vermont State Historic Sites. These are properties that are owned by the state, most of them deeded, gifted, purchased, transferred to the Division for Historic Preservation. I'm joined today by Jamie Duggan, who's the Director of Preservation for the State Historic Sites. And he'll go into some detail about the specific projects and stuff. So as Madam Chair said, we're in section 4, line 39, the Historic Sites Maintenance Fund. The historic sites were established in 1947, although the first historic site that we ended up owning was in 1903. So we've been collecting for a while before the Vermont State Historic Sites Program was actually established. And then under President Johnson, the National Historic Preservation Act was created in 1965, which created the State Historic Preservation Office and the Division for Historic Preservation. And we subsumed all of the efforts for the historic sites, for markers, for grants, for project review, National Register, State Register. So there's a lot we have our fingers in. It's under. We have a portfolio of 84 buildings. That's counting buildings individually from sheds to the monument in Bennington. Not all of these are open to the public. Most of them are. Some of them do have special events happening, like Kent's Corner in Calais has 2 special events that bring 6,000 people annually. We also have buildings that are presently under some major construction, so not open. We've been trying to prioritize, give you very detailed budgets on the needs. And we have close to 2,000 acres, so that includes trails and forests and everything as well. Our properties are spread from one end of the state, Fairfield, all the way down to Bennington. Nothing is close together. We have a team of, as I said, Jamie with the Director of Historic Sites Preservation that takes care of the maintenance. We have 3 site administrators who collectively have about 100 years of experience with us, really, really dedicated people. One of them's been with the state for 45 years. Great treasures and very knowledgeable about their historic sites. This year, I would like to point out that we had a premier visitation. We had 82,000 people come to the historic sites. Traditionally, before COVID, we were averaging about 5,000. I'm chalking up the increase to visitation and gift shop sales and admissions as well, where we brought in over $500,000. People being tired of COVID, wanting to get out and travel. The 250th semi-quincentennial anniversary is coming up, and several of our sites have Revolutionary War histories. We've got 2 sites associated with presidents. And we've also been, as I said, slowly working on our maintenance and prioritizing and highlighting that maintenance so that people can come and see what we're finding, what we're doing. And we're updating our exhibits as well. They have not been refreshed, most of them for 20 years. So there's a few, Chimney Point we did 5 years ago, but the others we're slowly updating. We're doing more research. We've got interns and temporary staff helping us update things. So we're really trying to climb out of the hole that has been major maintenance and historic sites. The funding that we have traditionally does not go far enough. As you can see from this chart where I brought it back to fiscal year 15, I want to point out that regular straight line major maintenance was at $200,000 and projects were line items. So we were traditionally getting anywhere from 50 to $500,000 for line item projects.
Did I ask what document
Yeah.
you're working
How
from?
many of these slides?
Yeah, Phil, we're getting.
This was too large for Laura to send via email.
Oh,
So it's given me a flash drive. And as soon as I have an opportunity, I will print
I'm
it.
so sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I'm sorry. It popped back 3 times yesterday, no matter what I did.
Thank you.
This slide is very helpful to see what has been expended in the past. And I know sometimes we've jumped up the appropriation from the governor's recommend because you've had a particular project that has come to the top that really needed more addressing quickly.
Yeah, and as Jamie will go into more detail, the longer things are put off, the more deferred the maintenance is, the higher the costs, but significantly for these resources that are highly important to our history and our Vermont heritage and marketing, the maintenance, the deterioration is worse. A little bit of ice damming on your house, you can deal with, but if it's left unattended at a historic site, it can cause a lot more damage to a historic roof.
And a lot of our historic sites are closed over the winter.
Correct. They are all closed. It is our dream someday to have Bennington open year round. It had been in the 20s, in the 30s. And when we replaced the sidewalks by the gift shop, we had those heated because people, including our staff, were falling. So it's these little bits that we keep moving forward for the bigger picture that we do see. The recommended budget is 550 with no line item project. So I will turn this over to Jamie, who will talk about some of the specific projects.
Yes, your last statement, I didn't understand. I thought you said 550, but I saw 500. Is you asked for 550, but we only allowed it or recommended 500,000? Is that,
That's FY 24.
well, that's why I was,
FY 26 and FY 27, which is in the gray part, is 550.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, this is what we actually received.
Right, okay.
We asked for more than the governor's recommending.
Very good. Thank you. I'm back on track.
And the governor recommended 550.
Yes,
550. Your anticipated need is 2.24 million
for both years.
for both years. So that's important for the committee. So the ask right now from historic preservation for 2 years instead of the 1.1 million is 2.24 million.
Now I'm on track.
Correct?
Our official ask was 700 for each year. But we respect what the governor is doing with the capital.
I mean, if you give it to Chester Arthur, I could probably vote for it.
No, we're not going down that road. We're not doing pork. Not doing pork. Oink, oink.
Unless it's a, Bennington Battle Monument.
Well, that's a whole. So,
So I will say the anticipated need does not include the major project at Bennington Monument, but it does include the safety measures we have to undertake every year to open the monument and to maintain the resources like the elevator and such that are deteriorating because of the moisture in the building. Jamie?
Right. Thanks for the record. My name's Jamie Duggan. I'm the Director of Preservation at the Division for Historic Preservation, and I primarily am working in the Historic Sites program. A little background for me, my preservation experience started in the trades. I ran my own construction and contracting and consultant business here in Vermont for 15 years. I had the great opportunity to learn a number of different trades. My specialty was historic masonry. And I'm a master mason, and I also have a graduate degree from the University of Vermont's graduate program in historic preservation. Excuse me. That qualification allowed me in my previous life to be principal investigator and manage projects that were receiving federal funding and were required to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards, which all of our projects in the sites must do. So I've been with the state. Today's actually the start of my 13th year. And I started as a project review coordinator. And at that time, the sites were essentially managed by one person, the historic sites section chief. And that was done here at the home office in Montpelier. And then we had, as Laura mentioned, 3 wonderful site administrators spread out across the state. I'll tell you a little bit about them in a minute. At that time, and for decades, BGS was really responsible for managing almost all of our capital construction projects, as well as most of our maintenance. And funds were allocated to them through the capital construction bill. That allowed our site section chief to focus on the programming, the curation, interpretation, marketing, all those other things. As Laura mentioned, our funding was level for a number of years, and that started the beginning of a more noticeable cascade of deferred maintenance. So by 2018, there were a number of things that were happening. BGS had, and the sites, we had a number of retirements of long-serving folks. And there was also a change within BGS where they informed us because of their increasing workload, they were no longer going to be able to provide us that level of service that they had been basically serving as our architects, engineers, project managers on a number of projects. Our budget did not have the ability to absorb hiring out for those services and still having money for labor and materials. So we initiated a little bit of a plan that essentially set up my current position, and we started to receive our funds directly and manage our own projects. We still have a great relationship with BGS, and they are very helpful. They deal with a number of our cyclical contracts, plowing, lawn mowing. They go out in batches along with some of the rest areas and other state buildings that BGS manages for us, which is a huge help. And we do still have support in the design and construction realm. We have right now 2 projects that one project manager is working on for us. I think another thing that's important to know as we go into this is we're very similar to state parks and BGS, and that we have stewardship of cultural and heritage resources, but we do not have the infrastructure available that those departments do. We do not have full-time maintenance staff. We do not have district offices with tools and trucks and available labor. And that has definitely put a pin in some things. So I started in this position in 2019, ready to hit the road running, and then COVID hit. And I won't go, you all know what has happened since then with the industry and costs. So we started managing that, and then the flood came, and we had a number of properties that were damaged. still working through that process. But so we found ourselves in a place where we needed to take more ownership of our projects and really start to manage them on our own. So this is Monument Road up in Swanton. This was the last line item that we directly received and was the first project that I got to work on in this capacity. There was a riprap project that happened. We had erosion of the bank. This is a Native American cemetery. And there were some concerns about human remains and other issues, grave goods becoming exposed and lost. So we did a lot of archaeology here because of the sensitivity, and we installed the riprap. We, over the course of a couple of years, we allowed the work to settle. It was done very well. We only had to top it after 2023. And then last year, we finished with some of the funds available, clearing out the invasive brush and other things that were creating a nuisance. There were people who were entering the property and going down and essentially partying on the bank. There was old furniture, there were tires that were being burned. This was an issue for the neighbors. So we really cleaned up the site and have eliminated a lot of those issues. On top of that, this was dedicated in 2022 as Vermont's first archaeological landmark. Which gives it a little bit more protection in a number of ways. Slide. This is a view from last fall, and we were able to get the project done under budget. We reallocated, I believe it was about $12,000
Is in this capital bill.
in this capital bill.
Job well done.
Hey,
So we're going to move around the state real quickly, but moving over to Chester Arthur, as Laura mentioned, this monument was placed in Fairfield in 1903 and was really the start of the Historic Sites Program. The state began acquiring land shortly after that, and this property in the 1930s, and then this is a view from the dedication ceremony there in 1903, the historic image on the right. This house is actually a reconstruction, and was built in the 1950s based off some archival information and historic photographs. This site was mothballed during COVID. We were able to reopen it, and we've had, while the numbers are small, only 614 people, for them to find this all the way out where it is in Fairfield is sort of remarkable. We have some issues with the building. The building has a number of with a number of our buildings, we have saturated conditions around the building and not very good ventilation. We have mold that's developed up on the second floor because of that. That's also where we have the only bathroom on site, which is really just for staff. This site does not have facilities for the public. We this year brought in a porta potty and placed it in our parking lot. Had some issues with that as well, but that's sort of what we're needing to do to provide some services for folks who do make their way all the way out there.
Let me just stop you there to help the committee along a little bit. There is this document here that I'm just helping the committee here, that pertains to historic sites and the major maintenance. And there's a list here of the sites, projects that might be included in the FY24. Unexpected. What do you mean by FY24 unexpected?
A lot of that was a result of the flood.
Okay. So your these are, if you go to the columns for cost, are those current costs, FY25? Current costs? Like I'm just looking at,
For the anticipated projects?
Yeah.
Yes.
and that would, so there's a whole list, the way it's stapled, it's kind of backwards, the way the machine did it. starts with Moral Homestead and then goes all the way back. So these are the major maintenance projects that are out there, and it's listed in the column for projects, what it would be for that particular historic site, and then the projected cost. Now, when it talks FY 25 projected costs, is that, because you come in at a total of 993,000, is that part of the FY 24-25 1 million that you got?
Minus the major work at Bennington, yes,
You mean minus the major work?
the $40 million for Bennington.
Right. But there is money that has gone to the Bennington Monument.
Yes, there's other parts of the monument that are in
For
there.
the committee to look, last year in FY 24 and FY 25, historic preservation got $1 million from our capital bill for the 2 years. Okay? So on this sheet, this is a major maintenance tally. Here on this side is the name of the site. In this column here, it says FY 25. Where there's a dollar amount is how much of that 1 million went towards that project. Okay? So at the end of FY 25, there is an anticipated expenditure of 993,800 for your 1 million. Did folks follow? Yeah.
That's under major maintenance.
This is all major maintenance. This is the document,
Yeah.
major maintenance. Okay,
I get another $6,100 spread around.
that will come over into the FY.
But they underrun before, so they'll.
But those dollars may revert, may just roll over to the others. So this is a projected list of projects that are out there for major maintenance at all of our historic sites. Okay. And then the FY 25 column shows where the money from our 2 capital bills, 2 years, FY 24 and 25. We appropriated $1 million. And this is where they went
Yes,
for that. So this list for projects, this would still be in play for FY 26 and 27. And there may be new projects that would also be coming in for 26.
yes, correct. And then we have to prioritize based on the site, the need, the money, any additional grant funding we can get.
So the other thing for the committee to remember, historic preservation asked the governor for 700,000 FY 26 and 700,000 FY 27. The governor put in the budget 550 for each of the years. So it did not go with the full request. That's information we need to know. We've got new members here, so I'm kind of bringing them along. That's information we need to know when we go to market. Because some folks may want to try to get close to 700. Some folks may say, we got too many other needs, we'll do 550. Or more or less. I'm just kind of laying out the groundwork to help members figure out, to hear your testimony, how that plays in with how we make decisions when it comes time for markup.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
It's not really part of this, I guess, but it is. So in Chester Arthur, around the corner is the church, but that's not on there.
The church is not open as part of the site because it turns out that the Arthur family never set foot in that building.
Really?
Yes, this year we stewarded a really wonderful relationship with the community, which used the building during the summer. And they are going to be using the building again during the summer this year.
Yeah, it's Spencer.
And we're having conversations about possibly transferring ownership to them
Okay.
because it does not meet our mission. It's in very good condition.
It's the coolest building. I live.
Yeah,
That's why I was asking. It's like,
yeah,
it's a much cooler building, but since he has no connection to it. It's-
none whatsoever. His father was a preacher and did have a church in that area, but
Just not
that
that.
was not the building.
It's like this is Yes,
Right, but this one is at least made from a reconstruction,
Yeah.
you know, that we can associate with
I've
them.
always been curious.
We're not exactly sure why we ended up with the church.
Well, it's good to know. Thank you so much for clearing that up.
John?
I know this is probably not the time to do it, but I just want to ask. There's a number or so in here that I have questions about. When would we talk about that?
So it depends what the question is, and it depends if you're talking about current money that's been,
Well, the one,
allocated.
yeah, so it's the paint on the exterior of this is at $88,000. So
Oh,
coming
for
from,
Chester Arthur.
is that this house, 88,000 to paint that? So
I think
Just-
that's a little off.
So just, so I just want to, I would want to, that's one of the things where I would see like, well, who came up with that number? Because it doesn't seem right.
Seems
to
pretty
me.
high.
Oh, it is small.
And I just did a quick takeoff and I could paint it for 10 grand.
Don't say that. You gotta be
5 for
careful.
lead.
Sorry,
You gotta be careful.
Add 5 for lead.
Hmm?
sure.
But yeah.
I just,
it's nowhere
when do we
close to
talk about
88.
that stuff?
You ready to respond to that?
Sure.
Okay, go for it.
That was the number I came up with, and it is probably on the higher end. And that's based on a number of issues that are consistent across the sites. We have to deal with specialty contractors. Most people can paint, but not everyone can paint well. And that is a really important component of how we treat our buildings is with the right maintenance program. The location here is also a challenge. It's far away from a lot of the more metropolitan areas, for lack of a better word, where contractors are busy. So we have a tremendous issue the last few years trying to get contractors to simply put a proposal in, first of all, and we have seen a tremendous increase in costs. There's also in preservation projects, always discovery conditions and unforeseen issues that arise. So I do like to keep a contingency in there to account for that. It's always better to have money to return than to come back asking for more. So
The building also needs to be scraped, and with almost every building we have, there's lead paint that we have to address and deal with that. And there is siding that needs to be replaced as part of it. So it's not as simple as just painting.
I will also say I chose a nice photograph to show you the front of the building. And if you visit there, and you're welcome to, because the grounds are open, you would see the front needs a lot more work. And the back, which is actually painted red in a throwback to saving some money on paint colors on the rear of the house, is almost fully peeling off. So the images don't accurately display perhaps the current conditions.
Okay.
And the current condition related to the paint is also tied to the moisture that's
Moisture,
getting in the building, the mold. So we have to be very cognizant of what we do first. If we painted it, scraped and painted it right now, we would be doing that again next year. Because we've got to stop the problem that's causing that. Because we've painted it in the last 10 years.
Yes, we have. About 8 years ago, I think it was 7 or 8 years ago.
So do our historic sites have to use a special type of paint or you?
Well, it varies according to what the historic paints are or, different formulations used on different materials. And we, take efforts to identify that. Typically, our projects include some type of testing and analysis, paint colors, recipes, that type of. We are, in meeting the Secretary of the Interior standards, we are repairing. And when things are too far deteriorated to repair, then we replace in kind. So that would be a wood repair for a wood element. Windows are something that we're always working on. We restore our windows and with air sealing and other updates, get great performance. We do not heat our buildings for comfort or for heat. The buildings are really only heated minimally in the winter to sort of stabilize them through the different temperature swings and stuff that happen, and circulate air within them to alleviate some of these humidity issues that are happening.
I'm not, yeah, I'm not trying to give you a hard time about it. I'm just trying to wrap my head around that. And I understand that. So why, are you saying that we should do the air in there first, like before you paint it?
My recommendation is that we first we need to remove the mold issue and fix that. And then we need to install adequate ventilation to alleviate the issue within the building. And then we need to do some treatments in the basement, vapor barrier and other things to prevent the moisture from just wicking up through the structure.
Painting will
Um,
last. You do the painting last.
Yes.
Right, but it also becomes a dance, like the site is open and we want it to look as best as we can, so that's where we're trying to move things along as fast as we can, but we get caught up with other priorities and other disasters.
So if you look on the sheet here,
Yeah.
if you go to the very last, almost the last page, when it's the last page, and you look at just Arthur House.
Yep.
And it has remove, rebuild entire roof.
Yep.
Framing wood shingle roof due to moisture issues from water infiltration and lack of proper ventilation. And the projected cost of that's $125,000.
Yep.
So the balance is, do you do that first and do a little bit of painting at the same time? But it depends how much money we appropriate for their major maintenance. That's what it depends on. So if they stay at 550, what's some of their priorities to get done within that 550? If we find money and can bump them up to 700,000, what other projects would bump into that priority? So that's what we need to know.
And
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, very
Yeah,
much.
absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will also say, just for context, that so a lot of these numbers are derived from estimates from contractors and other things. Plus, just I did use some previous projects and sort of, added for inflation to get some of those numbers. And they are fluid at times. Certainly, until we have a contract in place and we understand the means and methods and all of that, we really don't have a final price often.
And Chimney Point was painted a couple of years ago down in Addison. What was that?
That was over $100,000.
Yeah.
That included, we have 6 structures there, tavern, metal roofing. We had wood repairs that were included in that as well. So that was one of the last projects that BGS let for us and managed that I sort of inherited. So just, to
I understand that. It's just that that's a small 4-sided building that should be able to.
I agree.
Just see,
I told Laura I could paint it in an afternoon, and then I got up there and thought better.
so now that you're doing this more in-house, where before you had BGS doing a lot of the legwork and documents and design documents and plan. Are you having a harder time with this? Is it increasing the cost of the projects? Was it when BGS was doing most of this work, the projects coming in at a different price? Or is it hard to compare because the construction world is so different?
It's a little hard to compare, but I will say that when BGS was working on our projects, they were not focused on specialists who knew historic resources and how things were put together or how they've been altered over the years, which is in fact some of the challenges we're dealing with now, where like at the monument, things were done inappropriately or not completely done. So the resources are reacting to that. And we're trying to fix and be better stewards of the historic resources.
So the key is when you go out to bid for a project, you're really sending out those bids to specialized folks that are familiar with working on historic structures. It's not your general contractor out there.
No, not at all. And there's very few of them. They're all very busy, like the Kent's Corner barn from the 1850s. We had to have a timber framer come in to help us stabilize.
It was Jan Lewandowski, who's a very well-known timber frame specializing in historic buildings, and he actually had done the last round of stabilization on this barn in the 1980s. And it was a little hard hearing him. He wasn't really happy with the way that his work had been maintained over the years, because now he was replacing some of his own work. So that was impactful, certainly, to hear that.
And that's something you'll see in our maintenance budget is we're trying to make sure that we're not just fixing and moving on and turning our back on it, that we're regularly maintaining and looking and using some of these spaces.
Trent?
Can you just expand on that briefly about what he would have wished for maintenance? Since you said he was disappointed in how his work from the 80s.
Yes. So if you look at the lower section here where there's an image of the barn, you can see that open section that's exposed there, which it was historically, that's a drive for manure carts to come out in the gravity barn here, bank barn. But all of that wood was never, the structural posts were never sheathed with another skin of wood to protect it. And so some of those post bottom repairs that were done are now in the process of having some issues again. I will say that in most of our projects, we implement a request for qualifications first so that we are getting experienced and qualified professionals to bid on this, which helps. We can have lots of problems with a low bid situation if that vendor is not familiar with working with historic buildings. We've seen that happen before. So we do take an effort to get the right team together. And when we're able to do that, we've had great success. This barn is certainly.
I'm sorry, we have another question here. I'm sorry, Joe.
Well, I can wait.
Oh, go ahead.
How many, if any, of the sites are inactive because of scarcity of maintenance funds?
Old Constitution House, Justin Morrell's going to be closed for a year, hopefully just a year. It might end up being longer. As you know, Chester Arthur was closed for a while and we moved that forward to get it open maybe sooner than we should have. Eureka Schoolhouse, so we're probably looking at 5 sites. And as things get pushed further down the road, we're going to end up having to close more of them. And it's the preservation of these historic resources and their character defining features, but it's also the safety for our visitors.
So if they're closed, that means there's no work going on there. That's not why they're closed. They're closed because maybe it's a safety issue for the public.
The rub for us is that we still have to maintain resources that are not open to the public as best as we can, but we move that to the lowest level and we're trying to prioritize those that are open to the public. You know, like at Kent's Corners, a week before it was opening with a special exhibit, plaster was falling from the ceiling. So we had to rush out there. If it was a showing that we were doing, we would have canceled it. But it was BGS and art at the Kent. So we knew it was going to bring in several thousand people. So we had to get out there, emergency work and fix the plaster because we couldn't, one, have it deterioration of the historic resource, but we also couldn't have plaster falling on people and the artwork.
Thank you. And I just want to make sure I understood. So Bennington Battle Monument received $40 million recently, which I assume was
No.
No,
Yeah.
no.
It's
It
anticipated.
needs 40
a
million.
need. I didn't know if there was some kind of federal award or not.
No,
We got a CDS last year from Senator Sanders for $500,000.
$500,000. See, I'm glad I asked. I misunderstood. The last is a point of information on the Monument Road project. I had the benefit of sitting through a
Mhm.
presentation on it. So that bank that was riprap is actually not the original bank.
Right.
And so that was a channel cut in the Mississippi River in response to the 27th flood through that archaeological site, which is not. Very,
That's right.
Very, very cool. But I did not know that until when I drive by there all the time.
Good news is that the project has fared very well. in recent flooding that has happened and ice jams that have formed after that, which is great.
And also because these are historic sites and they're visited and we also have to follow regular permitting. So nothing we do is on our own. We have to involve A&R, we have to deal with V-Trans, BGS, local permitting. Just go ahead.
So we have more questions here. Kevin and then Sean?
You brought up the word permitting. Is there anything that legislation can do to make it easier for you to do what you'd like to do with the limited funds that we have?
I wouldn't say that permitting is an obstacle for us. It's usually dealing with the experts that are addressing that permitting, you know, like dealing with DEC, environmental conservation, to make sure our storm systems and streams and all of that are working right. I don't see permitting as an issue. It's just something on our list.
Yeah, not necessarily permitting particular, but rules, regulations, anything that's standing in your way that just, in your opinion, just costs a lot of money and doesn't add value. That's what I'm really asking.
I don't think so.
Okay.
In my brain, I can hear myself screaming FEMA, but that's
That's a different world.
that's a different
A
world.
whole different world.
For example, this is stupid because I don't know what I'm talking about, but if there's a particular expensive kind of paint you've got to put on it because that matches what it was in 150 years ago, as opposed to a durable paint today, just my unhumble opinion, that would be a waste of money. So that's the kind of thing I'm trying to pin down. I know there are historic sites that do not want to get involved because they want to maintain the function, the appearance, the accessibility. But as soon as we get into historic, then they say, man, it keeps us from doing what we want to do. My church in particular, 150 years old, Ludlow Baptist Church, beautiful facility, but we don't want any involvement because it ties our hands and we can't afford to jump through those hoops.
Understood. I think it's important for us to walk our talk. And so we're ready to meet those standards and meet those obligations. And we might be formulating, for example, a modern paint to replicate a historic paint. And in some cases, it might be appropriate for a historic formulation, but we wouldn't, for example, use that outside where it would wear. We do make some accommodations and we work with the materials that are available today. But it's important to understand what we have so we understand how we treat them.
My questions are meant to help, not to.
Understood?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I would also say historic preservation, as you will hear when Caitlin starts to talk, is set up to help you. There are grants, there's funding, and the rules are not to restrict what you do, but to help keep the building or the resource in a way that is why you appreciate it today. Because if you start taking off the porch, like at Chimney Point, for example, it doesn't look the same. It doesn't function the same. It's not giving that same story of why it's historic.
I hear you.
Yeah, no,
Thank you.
I'm from the government. I'm here to help you.
Well, we are government sitting in this room. So Sean and then Gina?
And I'll just try to keep it. I think I know the answer, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Back to Kent Tavern, you're gonna do wood storm windows. Why would you do the wood storm windows? Just for the historic?
To protect the original sash. This building did have sort of non-appealing aluminum triple trap storms that you might find on a lot of residential homes, which were failing, leaking, had all sorts of issues. Those were removed when the building was painted a few years ago, and the windows were painted. They weren't taken out and fully restored. But that would be interest to protect those original sash because they're exposed otherwise. And storm windows are a traditional way to achieve energy efficiency and keep that aesthetic with historic materials.
It originally had wood storm windows, and as Jamie explained, the triple track aluminum did harm to the windows.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
collectively-
and just with a limited budget and have, would take so much to take care of in Vermont, you know?
I think I'm gonna interject
Yeah.
here. Because these are historic
Specifics.
sites. These are
Yeah.
historic sites. It's not your residential home. You can do what you wish with it. This is part of the history of our state.
Mhm.
And we try to preserve as much as we can that history. And if we use products that were used back then, that's part of our history.
Yep.
And we can't keep losing and saying, well, we'll do something more modern, we'll do something more modern.
Mhm.
And then you lose the effect of having historic sites. So that's the balance that we have to play here. This is not our residential home. This is not our workplace for this. This is keeping the integrity of our state and what historically has occurred in our state.
Mhm.
And it's gonna cost more. It's gonna
And
cost.
we do have newer buildings in our portfolio, like the visitor center at Hubbardton, and we go to the hardware store,
Mhm.
get what we need to fix things, although I will say we're fixing this building a lot. And I wish we didn't have it. I wish it was just a battlefield.
Yeah. So we do have another question here, and then I wanna keep going because we're pumping up
Yeah.
time. Gina,
Just on the Chimney Point, the visitor center, is that a historic building?
Yes.
Okay, and then what's the finish restoration entail?
Oh, that's a separate building.
And is
That-
it historic?
It is.
It is,
It
okay.
is historic. It's actually the building that's right on the curve as you come over the Champlain Bridge.
Yeah,
And it we and with BGS's help back in I think the 90s, put a significant amount of money into the building. And then the plans were abandoned for its use. There were some other issues. Our archaeologists in the division have interest in making this a sort of annex for them on the western side of the state.
It doesn't have a bathroom, I don't think.
It does. That
Oh,
was-
it
that was
does.
put in the
Was part of
90s,
what they
but,
added, yeah.
But that's a low priority, honestly, which is why you'll find it, I think mine's all messed up a little bit too, but towards the end of the priorities.
is this list here, is this your major maintenance priority list? Or is it just done alphabetically? More alphabetically?
The upper section is our priority list.
Upper section would
Well,
be-
I guess it's the next page.
It
It is our priorities. There's a lot of little things that don't make it to this list.
yeah.
So all these projects that are listed here that have no funding in FY 25 are your priority list basically going forward.
Correct.
Yes.
And the more we can get on that list, the better we can plan for those.
So 550,000, you do some of these, get going on some of these projects. If you had 600,000 or 700,000, you'd be able to knock off a few more of these projects.
Correct.
That's basically how the money would flow.
Correct.
And there are, I'm gonna skip through here. There are some projects where we have gotten federal dollars to help us take care of the projects. Particularly like at the Senator Justin Morrill, which is Vermont's first National Historic Landmark. We already have to work with the Park Service and get their approval on everything. So we were like, well, you can kick in some money for this, but we have to match that money. So if we don't match it, we can't take their money.
And is there a time frame for matching that federal grant award?
Yes, yes, we've just gotten our last extension, so it's 4 years.
Is that grant award part of the executive order that came down?
Yes, it's frozen.
It's frozen.
And yesterday, I'm gonna go back in today after this and see if I can't get it out.
Well, would that one be subject to the court ruling that came out last evening?
They might have opened it up.
Which we'll find out.
Kevin,
just one more for me to not make assumptions. If magically you had $7 million, you would do all of the projects that are listed here in yellow. But because you don't have that, you've only got $1 million to the right, that I'm assuming. So the criteria you use to pick the projects that you're putting your 1 million in, is that something that you can delineate? I mean, is that easy to say, if we got matching funds and we're running out, that's gonna tie? Or the building's gonna fall down if we don't do something? I mean, I would assume that's the kind of criteria you're using.
Absolutely. My priorities are sites where we are open to the public and making sure that they're safe first and foremost. There are a number of issues that go that way. There's certainly some consideration on, while we think that they're all highly significant, some might have more significant attributes than others, and those would likely get, attention first. And then
Subjective.
certainly, yeah. It is a little bit of a puzzle for us as well. We do what we can with what we can get to with the funding that we have. And we also, sure, we could do all those 7 million projects, but we would still need to continue to maintain our structures over time. So we're trying to get to a place in our management that's more proactive and not as reactive to when we have situations like leaking roofs or other issues coming in where we have to move quickly. This is a great example of that. This is the upstairs of the Silly store down in Plymouth, the Coolidge Homestead, and it was used as his summer White House in 1924. Secret Service were sleeping in the tourist cabins over on the top of the hill, and so we celebrated the centennial of Coolidge's taking the oath of office last year, 2 years ago. Last year, this was the centennial celebration of this space in its highest use. Our site administrator did a fantastic job, Joyce Sherry, of updating the exhibit and providing some great new interpretive material. And plaster and water started dripping from the ceiling right as we were ready to open. So that was a situation where we have gained some capacity. We have now a temporary seasonal historic sites maintenance technician. I grabbed that person and we went down and we took care of it in the week to the extent that we could. We did all of the interior plaster repairs and scraping and painting and took care of that. You can see there's a little section on the left picture in the back around the chimney. Couldn't get a mason, still don't have the roof fixed. But that space was not presentable for the importance that this year brought for it. So that was, we really had to pivot and take care of that in the moment.
Admire the effort. You got the thumb in the dike.
And this was a perfect example of where we were able to take care of stuff ourselves, because as Jamie said, we've been trying to get contractors to come here to help us. And it is a challenge. So having the ability and the funding to do these things ourselves really helps.
so let's keep going here.
I also wanted to highlight, the flood still haunts us. We had 3 historic sites impacted by the flooding. Old Constitution House in Windsor, we learned, is in a flood zone. So we were told we had to elevate the building, which knocked the breath out of us for a little bit. And we were like, no, wait, there's got to be other options. So we're trying to figure out what other options we can do. The building had been moved to the site in 1914, so elevating isn't completely off the table, except that that would be incredibly expensive, particularly now that you have to move to the base flood +3. And there is a what?
Sorry.
And there's a huge, what is it, a reservoir lake
Lake Runnymede.
Like Remini.
Yeah.
right behind. And if that goes, no matter how high this building is, it's gonna go.
But I think also important to note that our damage from the flooding in all 3 of these particular historic buildings were from roof runoff and stormwater finding its way into the building, saturated soils prolonged, which created even bigger issues when we had that storm in December where things had warmed up and then they plummeted. We had rain and we had a lot of heaving from freeze thaw action in the soils around the building. So that's created a number of issues.
We just started getting some of the funding requested through FEMA for these.
Part of the 900,000.
Yes.
Now, is that going to be divided between those 3 sites?
Yes, there's dollar amounts specific to each of them.
His ears must have been burning.
You guys.
The education center, it filled up with water. It was supposed to be, it was designed as never flooding. There's no windows, there's no sump pump, there's no nothing in the basement, but it flooded big time.
In through the walls.
Yes, that's exactly what happened.
The drainage pipes were clogged and had tree roots actually growing into them. And it backed up. It took us 4 days. We pumped the entire cellar clear, came back the next morning, 4 inches of water back. And we started with 18, by the way. Came back, did it again, came back the next day. And then finally we realized that the water is just sitting around the building. And we had a contractor come in, excavate down to that pipe. Within cutting it, the rest of the water drained out within like 5 minutes.
But that would be part of our ongoing maintenance, to check all of these lines, to be, making sure our foundations are nice and dry and solid, not patching. We need to stop patching and doing the taping here and just turning our back on that. We need to fix these because, as you can see at the Theron Boyd basement, did you have another
Mhm.
picture?
Further back.
Which way?
Keep them.
Yeah. This foundation is moving and it's gonna fall.
There goes the house.
Exactly. And this building is from the late 18th century. It has no running water. It has no heat. It has no electricity other than what we've put in for the HVAC in the basement. It looks like it did when it was built and altered in the early part of the 19th century. So it is a really special, amazing place. And we have great plans to turn it into a conservation site where other elements of historic sites around the state, not just the state owned, can come here and do testing and learn about how to restore and open this up as a study house. And we've got some funders who are very interested, but until we're able to stabilize the foundation, we can't do anything.
So is for this you were talking about, there's a federal grant and we need to match, and I saw that you had 279,000. Is that the match for that federal grant?
And then we'll be putting additional funds into that to complete the project with items that are not included in that specific grant funded scope.
So is that going to be working at all on the foundation at all?
Yes.
For that, because you also have 150,000 that you've also are investing in the foundation. So that's all part of that for the project, as long as you can get the federal dollars. If you can't, if those federal grant dollars are frozen,
Right.
no longer available, projects going forward.
Then
Well,
we
it's
have
gonna
to,
be
we have to use more of our major maintenance because otherwise this building is threatened greatly and we won't be able to have it open. This is the inside of the Morrill House. This is up on the second floor where the water is just climbing up, freezing. And for many years, when BGS was working with us, they were doing their due diligence and removing the plaster, scraping the paint, just putting it back. And every year it would freeze again and fall off. You can see ice on the inside of this building.
So is the work anticipated to start this summer on this?
Yes, we already have the engineers on board, the architects, they've got everything planned out. So
The contract signed?
with the engineers and the architects, yes, not the subcontractors who would do the actual work.
Well, I'm just concerned if the federal money doesn't come through, that's 300,000 federal, is that what it was? 300?
It's 226 and our match is 279. And then as Jamie said, to finish everything, we have to put an additional 300 into it.
So if those grant awards are frozen and
Yes.
don't come through at all, then you'd have to find that 226 somewhere else within this budget.
Correct. And likely the final structural repairs, like replacing the porch that we had to take off and doing some other things, will have to wait.
Are there other projects here that you've appropriated money, that you have money put aside for that are needed for a federal match?
Old Constitution House has a semi-quincentennial grant, 460, I think. And then the congressionally directed spending for Bennington Monument has a $500,000 match.
And are those grants part of this part that's being frozen as well?
Yes.
So it continues after the court decision, which is temporary, they continue to be frozen. Then it puts a lot of pressure on you and a lot of pressure on us to really make some hard decisions.
We certainly have projects that we could prioritize higher and attend to that don't involve federal funding. And we have plenty of work to use the monies on. The nature of them and many restrictions are, what might be challenging.
We also have some buildings that are falling apart.
Well, correct. That's
one,
yes.
like the Bennington Monument, that we just can't absorb all that cost. On the state levels, we have partnerships with the feds, and if that money is not allowed to be released, I don't know how we can go forward.
Hopefully it gets resolved quickly.
But if it doesn't,
We have to plan.
puts a lot of pressure on our budgets. We're gonna lose some buildings.
Certainly aggravating.
How much federal money was involved with the old Constitution House?
460, I believe.
160,000?
Yes. It's one of
Is that
those special semi-quincentennial grants for the 250th anniversary. Senator Leahy wrote the legislation.
Is that a one-to-one match?
No.
And what is our match for that 460?
I think it's 150.
And do you know total federal grants that you're wondering about right now?
If we include our historic preservation fund, which supports the operations of the SHPO office, I've got $2 million frozen there.
We have 2 million frozen right now. And that's for your whole operation everywhere.
How much of that is attached to a match?
Almost all of it. Yeah.
And what's your overall budget that would also include the 2 million?
I'm sorry?
What's your overall budget that would also include that 2 million? Is that
We
your,
have to match the historic preservation fund with 40%. And then several of these federal grants for the historic sites are 50% match, or we've over obligated a little bit, knowing that more work needed to be done and we wanted to be competitive. We have applied for other grants and not gotten them because we were not as competitive with our match. So that's why the match in this particular case at Morrill is higher than what they awarded us. And last year we did raise, or I guess the year before, we did raise admission prices, which helped with increasing our revenue. They are consistent, comparable to state parks and other museums around the state. But, some of our exhibits are outdated, and with the houses, buildings deteriorating a little bit, it's hard to ask for more.
so it's 11:45, so let's keep going here. This is only our first major maintenance, and we've got a couple other items.
You want to move to underwater preserves or keep talking major maintenance?
Is there anything else in your slide deck that you really want to show us? Because we've got your sheet here. And basically, Bennington Monument, that's gonna take a whole discussion, isn't it?
That really.
Like, why don't we schedule the Bennington Monument separate, because that's gonna be so many moving pieces, and $40 million is an entity unto itself. For that, why don't we do that?
Who can pay for it?
Hmm?
Will's got the back.
We'll check with that.
Yeah.
We can move quickly to underwater.
So that is, folks, that's the next line, line 40.
Mhm.
And what's being requested is what the governor put in is 46,000 FY 26 and 46,000 FY 27. It's not much of anything.
It's an increase.
Right.
Once we opened those two additional preserves, this past summer. Providence Island Canal sloop and the Potash Point Canal boat. Both were opened, which increased visitation, we know. The underwater preserves have a very strong safety element to them because with increasing technology, these wrecks are easily found. And if we do not mark them, there is a way that they could be caught by fishermen, by boaters, and or people seeking to dive them. Several of them are a bit too, that we do not have open as preserves, are way down in the lake and it's dangerous to dive. So we want to make sure that we educate properly to make sure that people are not going to those historic sites, and that we have these 11 that we promote. And with the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, they're doing a lot of 3D modeling and photogrammetry to really get people excited about the exhibits that are in the lake. And there's even elements that you can see without diving.
What were the two sites that we just added? Was it Providence
Providence Island Canal Sloop
and Potash?
and Potash Point Canal Boat. Yeah.
So this, folks, is up in Lake Champlain. These are diving sites. It's through the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. But it's historic preservation that administers these grants.
There are underwater archives.
It's another part of our historic
There's,
history.
Private partner?
I'm sorry,
Who's the partner?
the Lake Champlain Maritime
Oh,
Museum.
they are. Okay.
Yeah, they've been designated as an archives for all of our underwater archives, archival information, and anytime anything is brought up, most of it's brought up because it is loose or dangerous. And we want to make sure that people cannot dive and collect things, which is against the law.
So what is the 46,000 used for?
It is to ensure that the permitting is done with the Coast Guard. It is also for buoys. It is to make sure that the lanyards that are connected from the buoys to the boats are new, secure, stable. There is signage underwater as well, warning some of the boats you can actually go inside, others you cannot, and we want to make sure that that is all clearly demarcated.
Questions from the committee?
I bet they never thought they'd be talking about underwater preserves and for historical. But it's a big.
Are these tourist attractions?
Yes,
Yeah, so,
Divers.
and how, do you get a lot of people that come to them?
yes, we had a number of visitors this year. We like that they register So we know they're going, then we know there's others that are not registering. We had about 300 register. We anticipate there are 600 dives that we were able to track through the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum and with the dive shops in Burlington. And then, of course, there's others who are still diving, and there's winter diving under the ice because the water's much clearer, but it's a little chilly.
I think so.
Just a little.
Thank you.
Questions? Okay.
Having flashbacks of scuttling conversations, but they are not.
Oh, no.
I think the committee will want to do a visit underwater.
Right. Also gonna buy a boat. Also gonna buy a boat. Sunk it. What was the name of the boat?
Oh,
The Adirondack.
Was it the Adirondack? They sunk it.
I know. That was an interesting discussion.
Okay. So those are the two items under Agency of Commerce and Community Development in terms of section 4. Okay. We don't have anything this time on roadside markers.
Very sorry and sad to say no. I adore this annoying little program. I do have 28 applications sitting on my desk.
So did you request money
Yes,
for the roadside markers
$25,000.
for each year?
Yes,
And if the governor didn't put it in.
no, but they did push it forward for the 10-year.
So you requested 25 each year, right?
Yes,
What the governor proposed is we take a hiatus for 2 years, and then in FY 28 and 29, we pick up the 25 again for each year. And you have how many applications waiting?
I have 28 on my desk. I have 10 markers at the foundry, and I have $10,000 remaining.
So you have 10 10 at the foundry,
Yes,
and how much, you have 10,000 remaining?
yes,
And how much per marker for those 10?
$3,000.
So you're short 20,000. Right?
In the last Capitol bill, unmarked grave sites lived around here too, didn't it?
Yes.
We don't do that one every year.
No, it's a stable amount of money
Stable.
just in response to emergencies.
We want to make sure there's money in there, but we don't keep building because, but the roadside markers, I just want to get this down. So you have 10 at the foundry. They're 3,000 apiece, right?
Are these paid for?
No,
Okay.
And is there any money left over? And you got 10,000 left. Is that in the FY 25 budget?
yes. Funding,
So you're 20,000 short.
yes.
And when are these markers due to come out of the foundry for payment?
Probably in the next 3 months, those 10 should be here.
By the end of the fiscal year?
Yeah.
And what happens if you don't have that 20,000?
Borrow it from special fund of state historic sites, so their income from admissions. And then pay them back. Or go to the applicants and ask if they could do any fundraising or pay for them themselves.
Folks, I would flag this, folks, please. So we can discuss this.
When did you say they're done?
Sorry,
When are they done? Probably.
right, this summer, by June.
Probably, because they're all scheduled for installation in summer.
It's amendments that we do, the state.
We have a really great relationship with V-Trans, and they put them in the state right of ways. Town garages are really stepping up and installing them in town right of ways, or Jamie does them
Jack of all trades.
That's really
Wonderful.
Yeah.
It's an extremely popular program. And it also will be hard because there's a number of markers being put forward for the semi-quincentennial from 2025 to 2027, recognizing Revolutionary War history, not just, Ira Allen and Seth Warner, but the women at the home front who were actually working as spies and some of the local history that we want to be telling.
So how much is it for a marker with the sign as well as the post?
3,000.
It is 3,000, it's total.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at this time, we're at 12 o'clock.
You can come back at your
But
pleasure.
I'm wondering, I know the next one is your historic preservation grants and then the barn grants as well. And that's all part of our building community grants. I know it's under your division, but it's lumped in our spreadsheet as our building community grants. And I'm thinking when we schedule the other grants, it might be good to do them all together.
Yeah.
So if you could come back when we do the building community grants and for Caitlin, you'll have to come back. But I see you once in a while.
I'm happy to come back.
I mean, the major maintenance it took a lot longer than what it normally does, but I'm just really concerned we're in our historic sites in your division, that we're digging a hole that we won't be able to get out of. That's what I'm beginning to feel. Am I off base on this?
When I started this job 12 years ago, you pulled me aside after I first testified and said, you need to plan ahead and present all of that and have your regular cyclical maintenance and know where you're going with all of this. And we worked really hard to make that happen using BGS as a model. But, we do get blindsided by things like flooding and excessive snow that cause roofs to fall in and mold is not our friend these days. And it's a hole the historic sites have been in for a very long time that we've been trying to dig out of. And I'm really proud that Jamie has this maintenance plan moving forward. And, we're doing a lot more in-house. It's hard to get contractors. Things are more expensive, but we see things happening.
And this is, again, is part of our history and our culture.
Absolutely. This is part of our tourism.
Brings in a lot of folks. If we don't maintain this, we're gonna lose a sector of our economy. Though it may be small, but it's a piece of our economy.
Right, for the local communities themselves as well as the state.
Any other questions? So before you folks leave, it might be good, and Cole, it might be good to figure out when you can do the building community grants. And it might also be good to do back to back for you folks if possible, and then do the Bennington as well.
So saving the best for last.
Yeah, so let's go off YouTube. We're back here at